The house was supposed to be the last one. After 40 years of designing bridges and overpasses, of wrestling with municipal budgets and intractable soil mechanics, all I wanted was a place where the loudest sound was the Saturday morning drone of a distant lawnmower. My wife, Helen, would have loved it. She'd have planted hydrangeas along the walkway and known the mailman's name by the end of the first week. But Helen was gone, and I was left to navigate this new, quiet life on my own. The quiet, it turned out, was conditional. The neighborhood, called Willow Creek Estates, despite a distinct lack of willows or a creek, was a testament to meticulous, borderline, oppressive order. Every lawn was a perfect emerald carpet, every mailbox the same shade of funereal black, every driveway a smooth, unblemished ribbon of asphalt. It was the kind of place you moved to when you were done with surprises. I was done with surprises. I'd had enough for one lifetime. My days settled into a comfortable rhythm: coffee on the back patio, a few hours in my workshop tinkering with the '68 Mustang I was restoring, a walk in the late afternoon. It was peaceful. It was exactly what I needed. The first tremor in this carefully constructed piece came in the form of a small cream-colored note card tucked under the windshield wiper of my Ford F-150. I'd been unloading a new lathe for the workshop, a beast of a machine that required careful maneuvering. In the process, the front passenger side tire had admittedly strayed from the asphalt and kissed the very edge of my lawn. The note, written in an aggressive, forward slanting cursive, read, "Welcome to the neighborhood. Please be mindful that vehicle tires are to remain on paved surfaces to protect the integrity of the turf and maintain our community's aesthetic standards. Thank you for your cooperation." It was unsigned. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the bin. An overzealous neighbor, I figured. Every neighborhood had one. I made a mental note to be more careful, comply, and avoid. That was the path of least resistance, and I was all about conserving energy these days. Life had taught me that you don't waste strength on skirmishes when you know a war could be coming at any time. A week later, a second tremor. This one was an official-looking letter in a windowed envelope, left in my brand-new regulation black mailbox. It was from the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. It informed me that my trash and recycling receptacles had been visible from the street at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, a full 2 hours past the 9 a.m. deadline stipulated in Bylaw 14, Section C, Paragraph 2. This letter serves as a formal warning, it read. Subsequent violations will result in a fine of $50. It was signed in a font meant to look like a real signature: Carol DeMarco, Chair, Architectural Review Committee. The name rang a distant bell. I pictured a woman with a tightly wound bun and a permanent look of disapproval. I sighed, rolling the empty bins back into the garage. It was absurd, but again, it was easier to comply. I set a reminder on my phone for 8:55 a.m. every Tuesday. Problem solved. I was a civil engineer by trade. I appreciated rules and order, even when they were excessive. Systems were predictable. People were not. I preferred to engage with the systems and avoid the people. The real trouble started, as it so often does, over a piece of ground that nobody had thought about in 20 years. My driveway ran along the southern edge of my property, bordering the pristine, chemically treated lawn of the house next door. The house belonged to Carol DeMarco. Of course it did. One afternoon, I was out applying a sealant to the asphalt, a tedious but necessary bit of maintenance. Carol emerged from her front door, a woman who perfectly matched my mental image, right down to the disapproving squint. She was holding a clipboard. It was a beautiful Saturday, and she was holding a clipboard. That alone should have been a red flag big enough to land a plane on. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carrying a note of strained politeness that suggested she was doing me a great favor by speaking to me at all. "Afternoon," I replied, not breaking the rhythm of my roller. "I'm Carol DeMarco, your neighbor, and the HOA president now." She said HOA president as if it were a cabinet position. "Frank," I said, "nice to meet you." "I'm glad I caught you," she continued, marching onto her lawn with an air of profound importance. "I've been meaning to talk to you about this." She gestured with her clipboard toward the driveway I was currently standing on. "This portion here." She pointed to a strip about 3 feet wide along the edge bordering her property. "You seem to be under the impression that it's yours." I stopped rolling and straightened up, my back giving a slight twinge of protest. I looked at the strip of asphalt, then at her. "I am. My deed and the property survey I had done when I bought the place seemed to be under the same impression. Carol gave a tight, condescending smile. Ah, yes, the surveys the real estate people use. They're often general. The original plat maps for the community show a 3-foot utility and aesthetic easement on this side of the property line. It's common area, technically. For appearances, I'd spent 4 decades reading plat maps. I'd argued over inches of right-of-way with city planners and construction foremen who could chew nails and spit rust. I knew what an easement was, and I knew what my property line was. There's a utility easement at the back of the property, nothing on the side here. The survey pins are pretty clear. The pins can be moved, she said dismissively, as if surveyors' pins were as portable as lawn gnomes. The point is, that strip is HOA common ground. You can't park on it, and you certainly can't perform this kind of heavy industrial work on it. She gestured at my sealant bucket as if it were a vat of toxic waste. I felt a familiar, weary feeling creep in. It was the same feeling I used to get when a politician would try to explain bridge torsion to me. Carol, with all due respect, I've seen my survey. The iron pin is in my front lawn, under that azalea bush, and the other one is at the back corner of the lot. A straight line between them marks the boundary. My driveway is a full 2 feet inside that line. This is my property. We'll have to agree to disagree, she said, her smile tightening until it was just a line of disapproval. For now, I need you to understand that the HOA considers this common property. You'll be receiving a notice about it. Please try to keep your vehicles and your projects confined to your actual property in the future. She turned and marched back to her house, clipboard held like a scepter. I watched her go, a strange mix of amusement and irritation bubbling in my chest. This wasn't about a 3-foot strip of asphalt. This was about power. She had her little fiefdom, and I was an unvetted newcomer who wasn't showing the proper deference. I finished my work, the rhythmic motion of the roller calming my nerves. I was a patient man. I would handle this with facts and reason. I had no idea that facts and reason were a foreign language in the kingdom of Carol. The first letter arrived a week later. A formal violation notice for improper use of and storage of a vehicle on HOA common area. A $100 fine was attached. I photocopied the relevant page of my property survey, the one with the surveyor's official seal and a clear depiction of the boundary line. I highlighted the line and the measurements. I wrote a polite, concise letter explaining the situation, attached the copy of the survey, and mailed it to the HOA's management company address. I assumed that would be the end of it. An adult would look at the evidence and the matter would be closed. I had gravely underestimated my opponent. The response was a second letter, 2 weeks later. It informed me that my appeal had been reviewed by the Architectural Review Committee, which I was certain consisted of Carol and perhaps a rubber stamp, and denied. The survey I provided was deemed insufficient. The fine had now doubled to $200 for non-payment. The letter also included a new violation. The Mustang, which was in my garage but visible through the open door while I was working, was cited as an inoperable vehicle, a violation of a covenant against unsightly car repairs. The car ran perfectly. It was just in a state of partial disassembly for restoration. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a campaign. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the quiet of the house, feeling less like a comfort and more like a vulnerability. Helen had been the one who handled these things. She had a way with people, an ability to disarm them with a smile and a plate of cookies, to find common ground and smooth over conflicts before they began. My tools were different. I used transit levels, blueprints, and the unyielding logic of physics. My approach was to build things so solidly they couldn't fail. But this wasn't a problem of load-bearing walls or soil compaction. This was a problem of human nature, and Carol DeMarco was a force of nature all her own. A line had been crossed. It wasn't about the driveway anymore. It was about the simple, fundamental right to be left alone in my own home, on my own property. She had chosen to make this a fight. She had no idea how well I could prepare for one. The next morning, I didn't go to my workshop. I went to my office. I sat down at my old drafting table, cleared away the clutter, and pulled out a fresh legal pad. At the top, I wrote a single name: Carol DeMarco. It was time to stop reacting and start planning. My career as an engineer had taught me one thing above all else. Before you break ground, you do the research. You understand the terrain, the materials, the regulations, and the opposition. Carol DeMarco was now my project. My first stop was the county records office. It was a dusty, quiet place that smelled of old paper and bureaucratic patience. I spent the better part of a day pulling the original subdivision plat maps for Willow Creek Estates, dated 1998. I unrolled the large, crackling blueprints on a lighted table. There it was, Lot 47, my property, and Lot 48, Carol's. The lines were clear, the measurements precise. The 5-foot utility easement was exactly where I thought it was, at the rear of the property. There was no side yard easement between our lots. The boundary line was a clean, unbroken stroke of the drafter's pen. My driveway was, with a certainty that could be measured to 1/100th of an inch, entirely on my property. I paid for certified copies of the maps. This was my foundation, but I knew it wasn't enough. Carol had dismissed my own survey. She would dismiss this too, claiming it was superseded by HOA rules. So my next step was to get a copy of the complete, unabridged covenants, conditions, and restrictions for the Willow Creek HOA. I'd received a summary booklet when I closed on the house, but I wanted the whole monstrous document, the one filed with the county. It was over 100 pages of dense legalese, a masterpiece of obfuscation designed to give maximum power to the board and minimum rights to the residents. I read every word. I read it twice. I highlighted sections, made notes in the margins, and cross-referenced clauses. I was looking for contradictions, ambiguities, and procedural requirements the board had to follow. Tucked away in a section on dispute resolution, I found it. Article 11, Section 4. In any dispute regarding property lines or boundaries between a homeowner's property and common areas, the official plat maps on file with the county shall be the final and binding authority. Carol wasn't just wrong, she was in direct violation of the very document that gave her power. She had either never read it, or she was counting on no one else doing so. This was a critical piece of the puzzle. But I wasn't done. A good engineer doesn't just build to code, he stress tests his design. I needed to understand the person I was dealing with. I started a quiet investigation. I spent time at the local library looking through old newspapers. I searched online property records and court databases. It started slowly. Carol DeMarco and her husband Richard had bought their house in 1999. Richard had passed away 5 years ago. She had first been elected to the HOA board 3 years ago, quickly ascending to the presidency. I started talking to some of my neighbors, carefully, not about my dispute, but just making small talk, getting a feel for the neighborhood dynamics. I learned a lot. Carol ruled by intimidation. She had a small clique of loyalists, but most people just kept their heads down to avoid becoming her next target. I met an older gentleman named Arthur, who lived 2 doors down. He was a retired accountant, sharp as a tack, but quiet. One afternoon, while we were both tending our gardens, I cautiously brought up the HOA. "She's a piece of work, that one," Arthur said, not looking up from his rose bushes. "Got my son-in-law a fine for having a political sign in his window. Not on the lawn, in the window. Said it violated the aesthetic harmony of the community." "Did he fight it?" I asked. Arthur finally looked at me, his eyes tired. "For a while. But she just buries you in paperwork. More letters, more fines, threats of liens. It's easier to pay the $100 and move on. It's a war of attrition. She has nothing but time and a bottomless supply of righteous indignation. Most of us have lives to live." He was right. That was her strategy. Make compliance the path of least resistance. But she had made a critical miscalculation with me. She assumed my desire for a quiet life was a sign of weakness. She didn't realize that I would apply the same methodical, relentless persistence to defending that quiet life that I once applied to ensuring a freeway overpass wouldn't collapse under 1,000 tons of steel and concrete. The fines kept coming. A new one appeared for a small oil stain on my driveway, a single drop from my truck, another for having my garage door open for more than 4 consecutive hours. Each one was a paper cut designed to bleed me slowly. I didn't pay any of them. I responded to each one with a formal, registered letter, citing the specific bylaws she was misinterpreting or violating, and referencing my evidence. I was building a case file that would have made a corporate lawyer proud. Every letter I sent, every violation she issued, every photograph I took was dated, logged, and filed in a growing 3-ring binder. The social pressure started to mount, just as Arthur had predicted. Neighbors who had been friendly with a wave now seemed to find the sidewalk on the other side of the street fascinating. I'd be working in my yard and see curtains twitch in windows. Carol was painting me as a problem, a disruptive element who refused to play by the rules. The irony was so thick I could have used it to pave a road. The turning point for me, the moment this shifted from a strategic defense to a planned counteroffensive, came when I discovered Carol's own hypocrisy. While reviewing the HOA's monthly financial statements, which, as a homeowner, I was entitled to request, I noticed a recurring payment to a company called DeMarco Landscaping. The payments were substantial, far more than what you'd expect for mowing the small patches of common grass. A quick search of state business records revealed that DeMarco Landscaping was a registered LLC, the sole proprietor, Carol DeMarco. She was using HOA funds to pay herself for managing the landscaping contract, which she had awarded to a company that she secretly controlled. It was a clear conflict of interest and almost certainly a violation of the HOA's own bylaws regarding board member conduct and financial transparency. This wasn't just about power anymore. This was about money, and then I found the shed. While looking at the satellite view of our properties on the county GIS website, a fantastic tool for any property nerd, I noticed a structure at the very back of her lot. It was a large, well-built shed, with what looked like a concrete foundation. I remembered walking the back of my property line when I first moved in. I remembered her shed, and I remembered the 5-foot utility easement that ran along the back of all our properties. The satellite image was clear. Her shed was built directly on top of it. Building a permanent structure on a utility easement is a major violation, not just of HOA rules, but of county building codes. The utility companies needed that access for a reason. I now had two powerful pieces of leverage: financial malfeasance and a significant code violation of her own. But I knew that presenting this information to the HOA board would be a mistake. Her cronies would circle the wagons, dismiss my claims, and retaliate even harder. I couldn't fight her inside her own system. I had to bring in an outside authority, an unimpeachable one. My plan began to form, a multi-stage operation that would unfold with the precision of a controlled demolition. First, I hired a professional, not just any surveyor, but the official county surveyor's office. I paid their fee to have my property lines officially staked and recorded. This wasn't a private opinion. This would be a government-certified fact, logged in the public record forever. I scheduled it for a Thursday morning at 10 a.m., 2 weeks out. Second, I compiled my evidence into a neat, professional package. The certified plat maps, the highlighted section of the HOA covenants, a detailed log of every violation notice and my responses, the business registration for DeMarco Landscaping alongside the HOA financial statements showing the payments, a printout of the satellite image showing her shed on the easement, with the easement lines clearly drawn in. It was an airtight case. Third, and this was the masterstroke, I picked up the phone and called the local television station. I asked for their best investigative reporter, the one who did the On Your Side segments, the guy who specialized in consumer protection and holding bullies accountable. I pitched him the story. HOA president fines resident for parking in his own driveway while potentially misusing association funds. I sent him a summary of my evidence packet. He called me back within the hour. He loved it. The combination of a sympathetic victim, a quiet retiree, a classic villain, a power-mad HOA president, and clear documentary evidence was irresistible. He and his cameraman would be there at 10 a.m. on Thursday. The final piece of the plan was to set the stage. I sent one last registered letter to Carol DeMarco and the entire HOA board. In it, I formally rejected all outstanding fines. I stated that, in order to resolve the boundary dispute once and for all, as per Article 11, Section 4 of the Covenants, I had retained the services of the county surveyor to officially mark the property line. I informed them of the date and time, and cordially invited them to attend and witness the results. I gave her no hint of what else was coming, no mention of the landscaping company, the shed, or the television crew. I just set the trap and waited. I wanted her to walk into it with all the arrogance and self-assurance she had shown me from day one. I wanted her to believe, right up until the last possible second, that she was in complete control. For the next 2 weeks, I felt a strange sense of calm. The project was designed, the materials were assembled, All that was left was the execution. The morning of the survey was perfect. The sky was a brilliant cloudless blue, and the air had that crisp early autumn feel. It was the kind of day that made the manicured lawns of Willow Creek Estates look their absolute best. I was on my second cup of coffee when the first vehicle arrived, right at 9:45 a.m. It was the news van, a big white machine with a satellite dish folded on its roof. The reporter, a sharp-looking man in his 40s named Dave, got out and shook my hand. "Frank, Dave Jensen, Channel 8 News. Thanks for calling us." "Thanks for coming," I said. "I've got everything laid out for you inside." I walked him through my binder of evidence. He was a pro. He absorbed the details quickly, his eyes lighting up when I got to the financial documents and the satellite photo of the shed. "This is good," he said, nodding. "This is really good. The driveway is the hook, but this is the story." At precisely 10 a.m., the truck from the county surveyor's office pulled up. Two men in bright orange vests got out, carrying tripods, electronic measuring devices, and a bundle of wooden stakes with pink plastic ribbons tied to them. They were all business, immediately setting up their equipment on the sidewalk. The show was starting, and the main attraction had yet to arrive. Right on cue, Carol DeMarco's front door opened. She emerged, clipboard in hand, a look of grim determination on her face. She saw the county truck and the surveyors and gave a small, smug nod, as if she had summoned them herself to prove her point. Then she saw the news van. Her stride faltered for just a fraction of a second. She saw Dave, the cameraman hoisting his rig onto his shoulder, and me standing calmly on my porch. A flicker of confusion, then anger, crossed her face. She recalibrated, plastered on a concerned, civic-minded smile, and marched over. "Frank, what on earth is all this?" she asked, gesturing at the camera as if it were a particularly nasty piece of litter. "Good morning, Carol," I said, my voice even. "This is Dave Jensen from Channel 8. I asked him to come down and observe the survey. I thought it was important to have an independent record of how the HOA handles disputes with its residents." Dave stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Ma'am, Dave Jensen, Channel 8. You must be Carol DeMarco. We're doing a story on homeowner associations, and we understand you're the president here." Carol was momentarily thrown, but she recovered quickly. Years of commanding neighborhood committees had prepared her for this. "Yes, I am," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We at Willow Creek pride ourselves on maintaining a beautiful and harmonious community for all our residents." "That's great," Dave said smoothly. "We were just talking to Mr. Miller here about a dispute over his driveway. He's been receiving fines for parking on what you claim is common property." "Yes, it's a very unfortunate situation," Carol said, shaking her head sadly. "We have rules for a reason, to protect property values for everyone. Some people just don't think the rules apply to them." She shot me a look of pitying condescension. The lead surveyor, a grizzled man named Henderson, walked over. "Ma'am, Mr. Miller, we're ready to stake the line." The next 20 minutes were a silent, methodical ballet of modern technology. Henderson and his assistant used their total station, a device that shoots lasers to measure distances and angles with pinpoint accuracy. They took readings from established county monuments down the street, their machine whirring and beeping. I stood with Dave on my lawn. Carol stood on hers, arms crossed, her smug confidence beginning to waver as she watched the undeniable precision of the process. Finally, Henderson walked to the front of my property, near the azalea bush, and hammered a wooden stake deep into the ground. He then walked to the back corner and did the same. He ran a string between the two stakes. The bright yellow line hovered in the air, a perfect, unwavering declaration of fact. The line was a good 3 feet on my side of the driveway. The entire paved surface, plus about a foot of grass, was unequivocally, indisputably mine. There was a beautiful, profound silence. The cameraman zoomed in on the string, then on the edge of the asphalt, showing the significant gap. Dave turned to Carol, his microphone extended. "Ms. DeMarco, the official county survey seems to indicate that this driveway is entirely on Mr. Miller's property. Do you have a comment on the multiple fines you've levied against him for this issue?" Carol's face was a mask of disbelief. She stared at the string as if it had personally betrayed her. "Well, the equipment can be wrong. The older maps, there must be some mistake." "This is the most accurate equipment available, ma'am," Henderson the surveyor said, his voice flat and unimpressed. "And it's aligned with the official plat maps filed with this county. That line is the legal boundary. There's no ambiguity here. Dave pressed on. So, will the HOA be rescinding the fines and issuing an apology to Mr. Miller? Carol stammered, her composure finally cracking. The board will have to review the findings. We act in the best interests of the community. Speaking of the community's best interests, Dave said, his tone shifting, we were also looking at some of the HOA's financial records. Can you tell us about a company called DeMarco Landscaping? The color drained from Carol's face. She looked like she'd been punched in the gut. I don't know what you're talking about. It's a company registered in your name, Dave continued, relentless. And according to these statements, it's received over $20,000 from the HOA in the past year. Is it standard practice for the president to award contracts to her own company? That's a misunderstanding. It's all perfectly legal. It was approved. Her voice was thin and reedy. The queen was not just naked, she was on fire. One last thing, Ms. DeMarco, Dave said, gesturing for the cameraman to pan toward the back of her house. We noticed on the county GIS map that your shed appears to be built on a utility easement. That's a county code violation, isn't it? Would that be in keeping with the aesthetic harmony of the community? Carol DeMarco was broken. She stared at Dave, then at me, her eyes filled with a venomous hatred that was almost pure. She said nothing. She just turned, her clipboard hanging limply at her side, and stumbled back into her house, slamming the door behind her. The story aired that night on the 6 o'clock news. It was brutal. Dave had intercut his interview with me, calm and factual, presenting my documents with the footage of a flustered, stammering Carol. He showed the surveyor's string, the financial statements, and the damning satellite photo of the shed. He ended the segment by saying the HOA's board had declined to comment, but that several other residents had already contacted the station with their own stories of fines and harassment. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. My phone started ringing. It was Arthur, the retired accountant. "Frank, you magnificent bastard," he cackled. "I just watched the news. You've done it. You've actually done it." Other calls followed. Neighbors I barely knew were calling to thank me, to share their own horror stories about Carol. It was like a dam had broken. The fear she had cultivated for years had been washed away by the public humiliation. An emergency HOA meeting was called for the following week. It was held in the community clubhouse, and it was packed. For the first time, the room was not filled with cowed silence, but with angry, emboldened homeowners. I attended, sitting quietly in the back. Carol was not there. One of her board allies tried to run the meeting, but he was shouted down. Arthur, armed with a copy of the bylaws I'd given him, stood up and formally made a motion for a vote of no confidence in the entire board, and for an immediate independent audit of the HOA's finances. The motion passed with a near-unanimous roar of approval. Within a month, the entire board had resigned in disgrace. A new, far more reasonable group of neighbors was elected. The audit revealed that Carol had skimmed nearly $50,000 over 3 years through her landscaping scam. The HOA's new board, on the advice of their lawyer, turned the evidence over to the district attorney's office. Carol was facing criminal charges. The county code enforcement office also slapped her with a massive fine for the shed on the easement and an order to have it removed at her own expense. 2 months after the news story aired, a "for sale" sign went up on her perfectly manicured lawn. It sold quickly. I never saw her again. Life in Willow Creek Estates returned to a state of quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't the tense, watchful silence of people afraid to step out of line. It was a relaxed, comfortable peace. Neighbors started waving again. People started talking to each other. The oppressive weight had been lifted. Sometimes, when I'm in my workshop, sanding a piece of trim for the Mustang or just enjoying the smell of oil and old metal, I think about the whole ordeal. I never wanted a fight. I just wanted to be left alone. But Carol DeMarco couldn't allow that. Her need for control was a hunger that could never be filled. She saw a quiet man and mistook him for a weak one. She tried to bully me with bylaws and bureaucracy, not realizing that I had spent my entire life in a world of rules and specifications. She tried to fight me on my home turf, and I just happened to be a grandmaster. The other day, I was unloading some heavy bags of soil for the garden I was finally planting. I backed my truck up the driveway, and without even thinking about it, I let the front tire roll a few inches onto the lawn. I stopped, looked at the tire mark on the perfect green grass, and smiled. Then I left it there, just because I could. The quiet that followed was the best kind of all. It was the quiet I had earned,